Joseph did not become reconciled to the idea that Mary was to be the mother of an extraordinary child until after he had experienced a very impressive dream. In this dream, a heavenly messenger appeared to him and said, "Joseph, I am directed to instruct you concerning the son whom Mary shall bear, who is to become a great light in the world. In him will be life, and his life shall become the light of mankind. To each that receives him, he will reveal that they are the children of God." After this experience, Joseph never again doubted Mary's story and the promise that the child was to become a divine messenger to the world.
About an hour ago, I landed at Tel Aviv, picked up a rental car, and I'm going to head straight to Nazareth. This very young, American-looking cityscape is Tel Aviv, which is celebrating its 100th birthday. Tel Aviv is the big exception in a country where every human settlement seems to reach back at least 2,000 years. There are no Roman-era ruins here, no stories of ancient prophets. Tel Aviv only has about as much history as you'd find in Las Vegas or Oklahoma City. So I'm going to drive on through Tel Aviv and head for the past. This is a journey into the Urantia Book's narrative of the life and teachings of Jesus. I've studied this book my entire adult life. It's a magnificently written description of God and the universe, of our origin, condition, and destiny. No one knows who wrote it, no one has claimed to have written it, no one has successfully done the detective work to verify human authorship. Its basic premise: God is our loving creator parent, we're brothers and sisters. It makes complete sense to me. Go north out of Tel Aviv up the Mediterranean coast on Highway 2, then cut over northeast on Highway 70 in the direction of Nazareth. For all the attention they get, Israel and the Palestinian territories occupy a deceptively tiny area, about 260 miles long and a hair over 70 miles across at the widest swath of land. The Palestinian territories coexist with Israel in a tenuous arrangement, occupying about a fifth of the entire landmass. Curiously for me, all of Israel shares multiple latitudes with Texas. If you head due east from San Antonio, you're on the same parallel as the southernmost city of Israel, Eilat on the Red Sea. Jerusalem is on the same latitude as the tiny town of West Texas, known by its native Texans for its famous kolaches. And if you're standing in South Dallas, you're on the same circle of latitude as Nazareth, 6,937 miles away.
Nazareth was a caravan way station and crossroads of travel, and largely Gentile in population. In Galilee, the Jews mingled more freely with the Gentiles than was their practice in Judea. And of all the cities of Galilee, the Jews of Nazareth were the most liberal in their interpretation of the restrictions regarding contact with Gentiles. And these conditions gave rise to the common saying in Jerusalem, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?"
In Nazareth, I'm staying at a convent run by the Sisters of the Rosary. My room is a simple dormitory-style space with twin beds, ample power to recharge batteries and access free wireless internet, and a Middle Eastern breakfast to set out for me each morning. The sisters' hospitality is impeccable.
When Joseph was a young man, he was employed by Mary's father in the work of building an addition to his house. And it was when Mary brought Joseph a cup of water during a noontime meal that the courtship of the pair who were destined to become the parents of Jesus really began. Joseph and Mary were married, in accordance with Jewish custom, at Mary's house in the environs of Nazareth, when Joseph was 23 years old. Shortly thereafter, they moved into their new home in Nazareth. The house was located near the foot of the nearby elevated land, which so charmingly overlooked the surrounding countryside. In this home, especially prepared, these young and expectant parents had thought to welcome the child of promise.
Present-day Nazareth has a population of about 65,000, one-third of which is Christian and the remaining two-thirds Muslim. The entire Nazareth metropolitan area has over 200,000 people. Jews live in the outlying communities, and they make up about 40% of the overall population. But everyone seems to get along okay. Here in Nazareth, I see very few police and no military. One of the first stops I want to make is to figure out something the Urantia Book gets very specific about. It states that the home of Joseph and Mary was located a little to the south and east of the southern promontory of this hill, and about midway between the base of the elevation and the road leading out of Nazareth toward Cana. My best conjecture puts the location of Jesus' boyhood home somewhere here.
One evening about sundown, before Joseph had returned home, Gabriel appeared to Mary by the side of a low stone table, and after she had recovered her composure, said, "I come at the bidding of one who is my master, and whom you shall love and nurture. To you, Mary, I bring glad tidings when I announce that the conception within you is ordained by heaven, and that in due time you will become the mother of a son. You shall call him Joshua, and he shall inaugurate the kingdom of heaven on earth and among men. Speak not of this matter, save to Joseph and to Elizabeth, your kinswoman, to whom I have also appeared, and who shall presently bear a son, whose name shall be John." Before she dared to disclose these unusual events to her husband, Mary pondered this visitation secretly in her heart for many weeks, until of a certainty she knew she was with child.
The focal point in Nazareth is the Church of the Annunciation, which celebrates Gabriel's announcement to Mary. Built in the 1960s, it can accommodate several thousand visitors at a time. At the back of the first-floor chapel is a small cave, which has been memorialized as a site of the Annunciation since the middle of the 4th century. Outside the church and about a half block from the entrance, I stopped to get a cup of fresh squeezed pomegranate juice. While I wait, I turn around and see that visitors to the church are greeted with this admonition from the Quran. About a 5-minute walk from the church is Mary's Well. This place of pilgrimage is the site of a spring which has supplied Nazareth with water, at least back to the Byzantine period, about AD 350, and very likely earlier than that. These days, there's rarely even a trickle of water. But photographs from the late 1800s show a very active spring and the sense of community surrounding it.
Before he was 8 years of age, Jesus was known to all the mothers and young women of Nazareth, who had met him and talked with him at the spring, which was one of the social centers of contact and gossip for the entire town. It was the custom for Joseph to take Jesus out for walks on Sabbath afternoons, one of their favorite jaunts being to climb the high hill near their home. Here they could obtain a panoramic view of all Galilee. From 4 directions Jesus could observe the caravan trains as they wended their way in and out of Nazareth. And to the south, he could overlook the broad and fertile plain country of Israel, stretching off toward Mount Gilboa and Samaria. Galilee gave Jesus a splendid environment for working out his own life problems with a minimum of educational guidance, and the great advantage of constantly interacting with a large number of all classes of men and women, hailing from every part of the civilized world.
From Texas here?
Texas, yes.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Richard.
Texas, Daniel.
Daniel
Soel. What you want to see? You're Protestant, no?
Yes, I'm Protestant.
Because the South Protestants, yeah? I make here, I make synagogue. I make this I send this to London.
Oh, beautiful.
This is doors to synagogue in London. The name synagogue Square. Square. 300
Yes.
and 50
Yes.
and a half. 300 and a half years
Yes, 350.
here in Nazareth.
Yes.
Family Daniel.
Right.
And my grandfather carpenter. Seven grandfather carpenter. I like Nazareth. Nazareth, my city.
Right.
Yes, I
Right.
like. But now Nazareth, little Christians, all the Christians, America, Canada. Christians here not good because I am little. I am here. This is once before 100 years. Nazareth, all Nazareth Christians now.
I'm here during Ramadan, in which Muslims celebrate Gabriel's revelation of the first verses of the Quran to Muhammad. I'm awakened by a 4:30 a.m. call to prayer. For a month, observant Muslims abstain from food, drink, sex, and other activities from sunup to sundown. This call to prayer 2 hours before sunrise reminds believers to take their last meal before resuming their fast at dawn.
Both Mary and Joseph entertained frequent doubts about the destiny of their firstborn son. He was indeed a brilliant and lovable child, but he was so difficult to understand, so hard to fathom, and again, nothing extraordinary or miraculous ever happened. The devout people of those days believed that men of promise demonstrated their calling by performing miracles and working wonders. But Jesus did none of these things. The confusion of his parents steadily increased as they contemplated his future.
This morning I drive 3 miles northwest of Nazareth to the ruins of the ancient city of Sepphoris. In Jesus' time, this is the Roman capital of Galilee, with an estimated population between 8 and 12,000. From Nazareth, it's about a 45-minute walk, and much has been made about the fact that Jesus grew up so close to this cosmopolitan Roman city. Sepphoris 2,000 years ago was advanced enough to support this large amphitheater, which some archaeologists estimate held as many as 4,000 people, back when there was an upper level above this reconditioned lower area. Archaeologists are continually uncovering details that indicate a settled, affluent Roman community. The floor of a Roman official's home features this mosaic of a young Roman woman who has been called the Mona Lisa of Galilee.
All did go well until that fateful day when a runner from Sepphoris brought the tragic news that Joseph had been severely injured by the falling of a derrick while at work on the governor's residence. Jesus desired to go immediately to his father. Mary directed that James, then 10 years of age, accompany her from Nazareth to Sepphoris, while Jesus remained home with the younger children. Joseph died of his injuries before Mary arrived. Jesus, now just past 14 years of age, awakened to the realization that he had not only to fulfill the commission to reveal the divine nature on earth, but that his young human nature must also shoulder the responsibility of caring for his widowed mother and 7 brothers and sisters, and another yet to be born. The great shock of Jesus' 15th year came when he went to Sepphoris to receive the decision of Herod regarding the money due Joseph at the time of his accidental death. Jesus and Mary had hoped for the receipt of a considerable sum of money. Now Jesus stood in the palace and heard Herod decree that his father had nothing due him at the time of his death. And for such an unjust decision, Jesus never again trusted Herod Antipas. It is not surprising that he once alluded to Herod as that fox.
This morning I want a break from instant coffee, so I'm sitting in a place called Aroma in an area called Nazareth Elite, which means Upper Nazareth. You can see the rest of Nazareth over there in the distance. To maintain perspective, Jesus' boyhood home was right about here. This is the Jewish area of Nazareth. The building with the turquoise circle is an American-style supermarket. A few doors down is an Ace Hardware. Israel has an intense concentration of brain power. Aside from the United States and Canada, it has the largest number of NASDAQ-listed companies. Israel ranks 3rd in the world in the number of academic degrees per capita. The USB flash drive was first developed and manufactured in Israel. Per capita income is $28,400. The Uzi submachine gun was invented and developed in Israel, named for its inventor, Uziel Gal. Israel unofficially has 60 to 200 nuclear weapons. There are no Starbucks stores in Israel. They tried, but it didn't stick. Allegiance to local Java like Aroma elbowed out the American icon.
In January of his 27th year, on a rainy Sunday morning, Jesus took unceremonious leave of his family, only explaining that he was going over to Tiberias and then on a visit to other cities about the Sea of Galilee. And thus he left them, never again to be a regular member of the household at Nazareth. He spent 1 week at Tiberias, the new city, which was soon to succeed Sepphoris as the capital of Galilee. Finding little to interest him, he passed on successively through Magdala and Bethsaida to Capernaum, where he stopped to pay a visit to his father's friend Zebedee. Zebedee's sons were fishermen. He himself was a boat builder. For a long time, Zebedee had contemplated making improved boats. He now laid his plans before Jesus and invited the master carpenter to join him. Jesus readily consented. Zebedee's wife, Salome, became a great admirer of Jesus and loved him as she loved her own sons, James, John, and David, while her 4 daughters looked upon Jesus as their elder brother.
Franciscan monks operate the site at Capernaum. In fact, the Franciscans operate 47 Christian sites around Israel, having been officially appointed by the Catholic Church to custody the Holy Land in 1342. Nearly 100 years ago, the Franciscans led the reconstruction of this limestone synagogue at Capernaum, which dates from around AD 300. But it's built on the black basalt foundation of a synagogue dating from the beginning of the 1st century.
Jesus conducted the services in the Capernaum synagogue more than half the time during this year. In the synagogue, Jesus found many new books in the library chests, and he spent at least 5 evenings a week at intense study. One evening a week he devoted to social life with the older folks, and the other evening he spent with the youth. There was something gracious and inspiring about Jesus, which invariably attracted young people. He was always interested in what they were doing, while he seldom offered them advice, unless they asked for it. This was the last year of his settled life. Never again did Jesus spend a whole year in one place or at one undertaking. The days of his earth pilgrimages were rapidly approaching. In March AD 22, Jesus took leave of the Zebedee family and Capernaum, and asked for a small sum of money to defray his expenses to Jerusalem. They all sorrowed when Jesus left them, especially the daughters of Zebedee. In Jerusalem, Jesus met, by apparent chance, 2 natives from India, Gonad and his son Ganid, who were traveling to Rome and other points on the Mediterranean. The 2 had arrived in Jerusalem during Passover week, hoping to find someone they could engage as an interpreter for both and tutor for the son. Jesus agreed to make the trip.
These are the remains of Herod the Great's swimming pool. Beginning around 22 BC, Herod began construction of Caesarea and named it in honor of his benefactor, Caesar Augustus. It became the Roman capital of Palestine and a major port city on the Mediterranean.
Jesus and his new friends Gonad and Ganid tarried in Caesarea because one of the huge steering paddles of the vessel on which they intended to embark was in danger of cleaving. There was a shortage of skilled woodworkers for this task, so Jesus volunteered to assist. During the evenings, Jesus and his friends strolled about on the beautiful wall, which served as a promenade around the port. The second afternoon of their stay, the 3 of them attended a performance in the enormous amphitheater, which could seat 20,000 people. And that night, they went to a Greek play at the theater. Jesus' real purpose of his trip around the Mediterranean basin was to know people. He came very close to hundreds of humankind on this journey. He met and loved all manner of mortals, rich and poor, high and low, black and white, educated and uneducated, cultured and uncultured, animalistic and spiritual, religious and irreligious, moral and immoral. From Caesarea, they took a boat for Alexandria and spent the next year and a half traveling throughout the Roman Empire, Rome, Greece, Syria, through Mesopotamia to Susa and Charax, where Gonad and Ganid embarked for India.
The Urantia Book says that after his travels, Jesus returned to Capernaum and worked there with the Zebedee family until his baptism. He didn't have a home, but he would return here over and over throughout the remainder of his earth life. Just north of Capernaum, the terrain gently slopes upward, an area called the Highlands, where the book says Jesus gave the ordination sermon to his apostles.
Just before noon on Sunday, January 12, AD 27, Jesus journeyed with his apostles to the highlands north of Capernaum, where he instructed them. Your message to the world shall be, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and in finding these, all other things essential to eternal survival shall be secured. This kingdom of my Father will not come with an outward show of power or with unseemly demonstration. You are not to proclaim, it is here or it is there, for this kingdom is God within you. Simon Zelotes asked, But Master, are all men the sons of God? Jesus answered, Yes, Simon, all men and women are the sons and daughters of God, and that is the good news you are going to proclaim. But the apostles could not grasp such a doctrine. It was a new, strange, and startling announcement. To impress this truth upon them, Jesus taught his followers to treat all people as their brothers and sisters.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm bringing this up in case someone's watching this who really knows their geography. It's the issue of the sites of two cities, Bethsaida and Bethsaida Julias. The Urantia Book distinguishes between the two towns, placing them here, as does its biblical map of Palestine from 1894. The spot the Urantia Book calls Bethsaida is very likely the town today called Tabgha, on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee. But if you visit the spot called Bethsaida Julias, you'll see it simply called Bethsaida. It is a remarkable archaeological site, and as the Urantia Book claims, it appears to have been a fishing village 2,000 years ago. But whether both cities existed continues to be an academic fistfight.
On Sunday, Jesus and the 12 planned to escape, unnoticed, to the opposite shore of the lake, where they proposed to obtain much-needed rest in a beautiful park south of Bethsaida Julias. But the people would not have it so. By late afternoon, more than 1,000 persons had located the Master in one of the parks, and he spoke to them briefly, being followed by Peter. By Wednesday noon, about 5,000 men, women, and children were assembled in the park. Jesus asked Andrew and Philip, What should we do with the multitude? They have been with us now 3 days, and many of them are hungry. Andrew sought out the chore boy, Mark, to see what was left in their provisions. The lad has only 5 barley loaves and 2 dried fish. Jesus took up the loaves in his hands, and after he had given thanks, broke the bread and gave it to his apostles, who passed it on to their associates, who in turn carried it to the multitude. Jesus in like manner broke and distributed the fish, and this multitude did eat and were filled. In the eyes of these people, the power to feed carried with it the right to rule. The multitude rose as one and shouted, Make him king! Jesus stepped upon a huge stone. My children, you would make me king, not because your souls have been lighted with a great truth, but because your stomachs have been filled with bread. How many times have I told you that my kingdom is not of this world? If you must have a king, let the Father of lights be enthroned in the heart of each of you, as the Spirit ruler of all things." These words sent the multitude away stunned and disheartened. Many who had believed in him turned back and followed him no more from that day. As they journeyed along to Caesarea Philippi, about the time of passing south of the waters of Merom, the apostles fell to talking among themselves about their recent experiences. Jesus suddenly confronted the 12 with the first question he had ever addressed to them concerning himself. "Who do men say that I am?" The apostles told him that he was regarded as a prophet or as an extraordinary man by all who knew him. Jesus pointed to them with a sweeping gesture. "But who say you that I am?" There was a moment of tense silence. Simon Peter, springing to his feet, exclaimed, "You are the deliverer, the Son of the living God." Jesus beckoned them to be seated. "This has been revealed to you by my Father. The hour has come when you should know the truth about me. But for the time being, I charge you that you tell this to no man. Let us go hence."
From the Jordan River, one quickly ascends almost 2,000 feet into the Golan Heights. Once part of Syria, this disputed territory was secured by Israel as a result of the Six-Day and Yom Kippur Wars. In the distance are the anti-Lebanon mountains, which include Mount Hermon, bordering Lebanon and Syria. I've inadvertently taken what I thought would be a shortcut across the Golan. Instead, I'm on a decidedly unmaintained road. I'm accompanied by a well-posed cow, an occasional cattle truck, barricaded vistas, some roadside beehives, a base for the Israeli Defense Force, and an ever-present view of the anti-Lebanon mountains. At the southern foot of these mountains is the ancient city of Banias. Banias comes from the word Panias, a city dedicated to the Greek god Pan, a throwback to the time when this area was occupied by the Greeks. During the time of the Roman occupation, it was Caesarea Philippi, Herod the Great's son Philip's attempt to establish a great Roman city. Underground springs from this area are fed by melting snow from the nearby mountains. This is where the River Jordan begins its journey to the Dead Sea.
The apostles heard much that was new as Jesus talked to them this day in the garden, and some of these pronouncements sounded strange even to them. "When I am no more with you, think not that the world will treat you better than it did me. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Though I stand before you in this physical presence, I come forth from God the Father. Before Abraham was, I am."
Mount Hermon is the highest point in Israel, rising 9,280 feet above sea level. Majdal al-Sham, the northernmost town in Israel, rests just below the peak of Mount Hermon. The town ends at the Syrian border. The terrain we're looking at over to the right is Syria. Below me is this barricaded security road separating Israel and Syria. Across this road on the Syrian side is the Shouting Hill. Syrians gather to get a glimpse of friends and family a mile away across the border in Israel, communicating with bullhorns, cell phones, and arm motions.
Jesus made ready his supplies, and securing a beast of burden and a lad named Tiglath, he proceeded to the foothills of Mount Hermon. They built a stone container in which Tiglath was to deposit food twice a week. After he left the boy, Jesus paused to pray, asking his father to send back the guardian seraphim to be with Tiglath. He wanted to go to this last struggle with the realities of mortal existence alone. After more than 5 weeks of unbroken communion with his paradise Father, Jesus became absolutely assured of his divine nature. During the last week on Mount Hermon, the great temptation, the universe trial, occurred. The rebellious arch-enemies were present with Jesus and were made fully visible to him. To all the Lucifer's suggested compromises and makeshifts, to all such specious proposals about the incarnation bestowal, Jesus only made reply, "The will of my Father in paradise be done." I am your Creator, Father. I can hardly judge you justly, and my mercy you have already spurned. I commit you to the judges of a greater universe. When the trying ordeal was finished, the detached guardian seraphim returned to Jesus' side and ministered to him. On an afternoon in late summer, amid the trees and in the silence of nature, he won the unquestioned sovereignty of his universe.
The first ski lift was constructed here in 1971, a few years after the Six-Day War, and the ski resort currently attracts 330,000 visitors a year. To this day, this land is not officially recognized as part of Israel, but occupied territory. Half of Israel's water resources come off Mount Hermon, and whoever controls this area has a sure line of sight into the surrounding nations. I don't expect Israel to let go of this easily.
When Peter, James, and John had been fast asleep for about half an hour, they were suddenly awakened by a nearby crackling sound. Much to their amazement and consternation, they beheld Jesus in intimate converse with 2 brilliant beings clothed in celestial light. Peter was first to recover himself and said, "Jesus, Master, it is good to have been here. We rejoice to see this glory. We are loath to go back down to the inglorious world. If you are willing, let us abide here, and we will erect 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." A silvery cloud drew near and overshadowed the 4 of them. The apostles became greatly frightened and heard a voice, "This is my beloved Son. give heed to him. For about half the distance down the mountain, not a word was spoken. Jesus then began the conversation by remarking, "Make certain that you tell no man, not even your brethren, what you have seen and heard on this mountain, until the Son of Man has risen from the dead."
About 30 miles southeast of Nazareth is Beit Shean, which has been continuously settled for some 3,500 years. These days, it's a quiet, bicycle-friendly hub between Jerusalem and northern Israel. For lunch today, I have a choice between McDonald's or a roadside eatery featuring falafel and shawarma. This succulent spitted meat is as ubiquitous in Israel as burgers and tacos are in the U.S. I settle for falafel and fries and take in the local traffic. There's a lot of hitchhiking in Israel. I pick up about a dozen passengers during my 2-week stay. Beit Shean's big attraction is the ruins of the ancient city of Scythopolis. In 64 BC, Scythopolis was taken by the Romans, who turned it into a model Roman city, complete with an amphitheater, advanced urban planning, and state-of-the-art public conveniences.
Around the middle of May AD 5, when he was 10, Jesus accompanied his father on a business trip to Scythopolis and was tremendously impressed with the clean appearance and well-ordered arrangement of the so-called heathen city. He marveled at the open-air theater and admired the beautiful marble temple dedicated to the worship of the heathen gods. It so happened that the annual competitive games were in progress at the Scythopolis amphitheater, and Jesus insisted that his father take him. The boy was thrilled with the games. Joseph was shocked by his son's enthusiasm. That night in their room at the inn, Jesus suggested that they go back home and work for the building of an amphitheater at Nazareth. When Joseph heard his firstborn son express such un-Jewish sentiments, he forgot his usual calm demeanor, seized Jesus by the shoulder, and angrily exclaimed, "My son, never again let me hear you give utterance to such an evil thought as long as you live." Later on, Jesus saw the Greek amphitheater at Jerusalem and learned how hateful such things were from the Jewish point of view. But later he included physical recreation in regular activities for his 12 apostles.
Just about 6 miles east of Beit Shean and Scythopolis is the Sheikh Hussein border crossing between Israel and Jordan. The Jordan River separates the two countries here. According to the Urantia Book, this is the part of the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized by John.
As time passed, rumors came to Capernaum of one John, who was preaching while baptizing penitents in the Jordan. Jesus listened to these reports as John slowly worked his way up the Jordan Valley. But Jesus worked on, making boats, until John had journeyed up the river to a point near Pella.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd like to know if there's a way I can go down to get a video shot of the Jordan River right here.
No. You have the bridge and you can go down to the river.
Or just from the bridge. I just want to get a shot of the Jordan
I
River.
asked, but I don't think so. Okay?
Can you ask? Thank you.
Sorry, but you can't.
Is there a place close by to get a picture of the river? Just right around here, very close.
Look in the map.
Yeah,
It's
it's not very detailed. Even if I park my car, even if I parked and
Yes,
watched.
you need to stop.
When the guy with the assault rifle came up to my car, I turned off my camera, which is a good thing because the first thing he checked was whether my camera was running. I go to plan B.
When John reached the neighborhood of Pella in his journey up the Jordan, his fame had extended throughout all Palestine, and his work had become the chief topic of conversation in all the towns about the Lake of Galilee. Jesus had spoken favorably of John's message, and this had caused many from Capernaum to join John's cult of repentance and baptism.
My map shows an unmarked road just south of the crossing. I follow a dirt road in the general direction, which leads me to this heavily barricaded fence near the river. I'm quickly greeted by members of the Israeli Defense Force, who treat me with civility, but they tell me there's no access to the river or any place I can get a view, that this is a secured area, and I need to leave. I turn around and go to a point slightly north of the border crossing to a spot I visited 4 years ago, where I got a glimpse of the river. Again, a heavy barricade, a security road, and no view of the river. A little farther south of the border crossing, I find this hiking trail leading toward the river, which leads me to this abandoned gunnery post. Nearby is this curious silhouette of an Arab family escaping across the field.
Just before the noon rest, Jesus laid down his tools, removed his work apron, and merely announced to the 3 workmen in the room with him, "My hour has come." He went out to his brothers James and Jude, repeating, "My hour has come. Let us go to John." Scores of repentants were standing in line, awaiting their turn, when Jesus and his 2 brothers took up their positions in this line of earnest men and women. When John recognized Jesus, the ceremonies were halted for a moment while he greeted his cousin and asked, "But why do you come down into the water to greet me?" And Jesus whispered to John, "Bear with me now, for it becomes us to set this example for my brothers standing here with me." Thus did John baptize Jesus and his 2 brothers James and Jude. And when John had baptized these 3, he dismissed the others for the day, announcing that he would resume baptisms at noon the next day. As the people were departing, the 4 men still standing in the water heard a strange sound. And presently there appeared for a moment an apparition over the head of Jesus, and they heard a voice saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." A great change came over the countenance of Jesus, and coming up out of the water in silence, he took leave of them, going toward the hills to the east. And no man saw Jesus again for 40 days.
It's Sunday morning. I've got my things packed up, having just completed 6 nights in Nazareth. I settle my bill with the sisters, fill up the car at a gas station on Paula Street, and head for Jerusalem.
A considerable company made ready to depart from Nazareth early Monday morning, April 4th, AD 7, for Jerusalem. Women seldom went to the Passover feast at Jerusalem. Jesus, however, virtually refused to go unless his mother would accompany them. And when his mother decided to go, many other Nazareth women were led to make the journey. From the time they left Nazareth until they reached the summit of the Mount of Olives, Jesus experienced one long stress of expectant anticipation. incident in all Jesus' eventful earth career was more engaging, more humanly thrilling than this, his first remembered visit to Jerusalem. And at no time in his life did Jesus ever experience such a purely human thrill as he stood there on this April afternoon, drinking in his first view of the holy city. But certain disillusionments also characterized Jesus' first visit to Jerusalem. The segregation of women from worship, the spirit of irreverence among worshippers, the noisy jargon of the Gentile court, and open prostitution. But the greatest shock came in the priest's court, the blood-stained pavement, the gory hands of the priests, and the sounds of the dying animals were more than this nature-loving lad could stand. He clutched his father's arm and begged to be taken away. During the night there appeared to him a heavenly messenger. The hour has come. It is time that you began to be about your father's business.
My first stop in Jerusalem is the West Wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall, the only area of Temple Mount fully accessible to Jews. Going into this area is airport-level security, and there are separate entrances for women and men. Temple Mount, which includes the wall that surrounds it, was built by Herod the Great's workers beginning around 20 BC. The West Wall is divided into two sections, an area for the men and another for the women.
Again and again during the Passover week, Jesus' parents would find him sitting off by himself, with his head in his hands, profoundly thinking. They had never seen him behave like this. They longed to have their strangely acting son safely back in Nazareth. By the end of the week, he had made many adjustments. But when the time came to return to Nazareth, his mind was still swarming with unanswered questions and unsolved problems. After Passover, the Nazareth travelers departed Jerusalem. Mary surmised Jesus journeyed with the men, while Joseph thought he traveled with the women. They did not discover his absence until they had stopped for the night. Many spectators who, having heard of this youth from Galilee, came to enjoy the experience of seeing a lad confuse the wise men of the law. Among Jesus' many questions, what really exists in the Holy of Holies, behind the veil? Why should mothers in Israel be segregated from the male temple worshippers? If God is a father who loves his children, why all this slaughter of animals to gain divine favor? Has the teaching of Moses been misunderstood? Since the temple is dedicated to the worship of the Father in heaven, is it consistent to permit the presence of those who engage in secular barter and trade? Is the expected Messiah to become a temporal prince to sit on the throne of David, or is he to function as the light of life in the establishment of a spiritual kingdom?
Above the West Wall is Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary. This iconic structure rests on the site of the former temple, which was destroyed by Roman armies in 70 AD. This is Muslim territory. Jews have restricted access to the site, but it's patrolled by Israeli police. They keep potential conflict contained and clear the area of non-Muslims during prayer time twice a day.
Hello.
Hi.
Hebrew, English?
English, yes.
English, how are you?
Just fine.
That's fine. The visit is closed in 11.
11?
11, you must go out, please.
The old city of Jerusalem itself only occupies less than a half square mile of metropolitan Jerusalem. Its population is about 35,000. About 25,000 Muslims, 6,000 Christians, 3,000 Jews. Probably the most sacred walk among Christians is the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Suffering, which memorializes the path of Jesus' crucifixion. The Via Dolorosa ends at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, considered the holiest site in Christendom. Helena, the mother of the Emperor Constantine, identified this area as the place of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. Constantine had a church completed here in 348 AD, which was destroyed by Persians in 614 AD. European crusaders completed this present building around 1100 AD. 7 different churches, including the Roman Catholic and the Greek Orthodox, operate this site. This upper area is built over a large rock considered to be Golgotha, the place of the skull. Elaborate memorials designate sites where Jesus was nailed to the cross and where the cross stood during Jesus' crucifixion. Below is the stone where his body was laid after the crucifixion, the stone of unction. A few yards beyond is the Holy Sepulchre itself, built over a spot Queen Helena designated as the location of Jesus' tomb. As I walk out of the church, armed Israeli soldiers, mostly female, are gathered outside. I follow 2 groups upstairs to the Coptic area of the church, where they are reading an Israeli military text about Christianity. I've hired a cab driver, Noor, to drive me into different areas in the Palestinian territories just outside Jerusalem. Here's a cool shot of Noor. In Arabic, Noor means light. We first go to Bethany, these days called Caesarea, meaning place of Lazarus.
The streets also not good.
Bethany is about 1 mile from the main highway. Because of security issues, it's a circuitous, completely inconvenient route from Jerusalem into Bethany. Before 2000, this road we're on was a main corridor to Jerusalem from Jericho. But in an effort to reduce suicide bombings and violence from the Palestinian territories, a concrete wall some 20 feet in height has been built to thwart access into Israeli areas.
Jesus was 19, and although his family could hardly afford it, He had a strange longing to go up to Jerusalem for the Passover. He traveled through Samaria, then passed on through Jerusalem, only pausing to look upon the temple and the gathering throngs of visitors. He had a strange and increasing aversion to the Herod-built temple with its politically appointed priesthood. He was not markedly conscious of it, but what he most wanted was an opportunity to talk with Lazarus and to visit with Martha and Mary. Next to his own family, he loved these three most of all.
The children and the brother of the man he died, there are cut the house too. This is for the children and this is for the brother. Here where there are built another house. No.
Nor first takes me to a house that was at one time a tourist stop, the oldest house in Bethany. The owner has since died, and the property is being divided between the children.
You want to go down? You can go.
Okay.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Not knowing Jesus was coming, Lazarus had arranged to celebrate the Passover with friends in an adjoining village.
The lamp is not good.
Yeah.
No lamp. You can come upstairs.
Okay.
Jesus now proposed that they celebrate at Lazarus' house. But, said Lazarus, we have no paschal lamb. Jesus entered upon a convincing discourse that the Father in heaven was not truly concerned with such rituals. The unleavened bread and the wine had been made ready for this Passover, and these emblems, which Jesus termed the bread of life and the water of life, he served to his companions, and they ate in solemn conformity with the teachings just imparted.
But the life is too hard. The life is too hard.
Yes.
Yes.
So what kind of work do you do?
I build something.
You're a carpenter?
No, I build stone.
Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus had been dead 4 days and laid away in their private tomb at the far end of the garden late on Sunday afternoon. Some 45 people stood before the tomb. They could dimly see the form of Lazarus wrapped in linen bandages, resting on the lower niche of the burial cave. After Jesus had prayed, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." The lifeless form of Lazarus began to move, and presently sat up on the edge of the stone shelf where he had rested. Everyone except the apostles and Martha and Mary fled to the house, pale with fright. Some tarried at the house. Many hastened to their homes. Lazarus greeted Jesus and the apostles and asked the meaning of the grave cloths and why he had awakened in the garden.
I asked Nora to take me up closer to the barrier. Until the barrier was built, it was a 5-minute drive from here to Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Since construction began in 2000, over 430 miles of wall have been constructed.
Jesus had feelings of profound affection for Bethany and its people. Nazareth, Capernaum, and Jerusalem had rejected him. But Bethany had accepted and believed in him. And it was in this small village where almost every man, woman, and child were believers that he chose to perform the resurrection of Lazarus. He did not raise Lazarus that the villagers might believe, but rather because they already believed.
Nora is driving me north of Jerusalem to Nablus. This road goes into the center of Palestinian territory. It was built and has been maintained by Israelis. This corridor is the location of a number of Israeli settlements.
Out of towers here, like there are soldiers, there are, checking.
So up there is a settlement.
Yes, this is all this settlement. And up there,
Most of these settlements are less than 25 miles from Jerusalem. I wrestle whether this is motivated by Zionism or the equivalent of American bedroom communities, just a better bang for the buck.
The antagonisms between the Jews and the Samaritans were time-honored and historic. The 12 apostles were not averse to preaching in the other Gentile cities of the Decapolis in Syria, but it was a severe test of their loyalty to the Master when he said, "Let us go into Samaria." But in the year they had been with Jesus, they had developed personal loyalty which transcended even their prejudices against the Samaritans.
What does it say?
welcome to Nablus.
Nablus is the largest city in the Palestinian territories, aside from Gaza City.
Here, this is big market also down.
Nora is nervous about driving in Nablus. All the cars have white Palestinian license plates. Our car has yellow Israeli plates. We stand out.
I think I don't know how to drive here.
Yeah.
The other stop I want to make here is to go to the top of Mount Gerizim.
Hey!
Nora gathers directions and makes sure we have ample provisions before heading up the mountain.
I bring for you the best banana in the world. This is Jericho.
Jesus and the 12 camped on Mount Gerizim until the end of August. By day they preached the good news of the kingdom, the fatherhood of God to the Samaritans in the cities, and spent the nights at the camp. The theme of Jesus' teaching, to see God as a father friend, just as he, Jesus, is a brother friend. And again he impressed upon them that love is the greatest relationship in the world, in the universe.
On the way back to Jerusalem, we pick up desserts for the evening dinner. Nor has invited me to his home. During Ramadan, dinner concludes the day's fast. It's a festive event. Nora's boss picks me up at my hotel and drives me to Nora's home below the city of David in Jerusalem.
Welcome, how are you?
Are you Nora's son?
Yes.
I'm Richard. Good to meet you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, this house, okay?
Adham. Say Adham. Say it.
احكي أدهم. Hey, don't worry. No, now please forget the camera. Eat. No, please forget the camera. After then you can make whatever you want. You can make photo until I don't know.
But I still have my light here, so I'm taking advantage of it.
Okay.
Hey.
Sure. هذا؟ هذا؟ شو هذا؟ قلت لك توكل. قرب.
The next morning I drive to Bethlehem, a 10-minute drive from the heart of Jerusalem.
It was not necessary that Mary should go to Bethlehem for enrollment. Joseph was authorized to register for his family. But Mary, being an adventurous and aggressive person, insisted on accompanying him. She feared being left alone, lest the child be born while Joseph was away.
About 3 miles from Bethlehem, the barrier wall appears, cutting off access from the main highway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Somehow I've missed a turn and end up driving up to an entrance for military personnel. I'm directed back a quarter mile to the public checkpoint. 4 years ago when I was here, there was a makeshift checkpoint in the middle of the road, and access was less complicated. Their system has gotten much more elaborate. I show my passport, pass through the checkpoint, proceed through the barrier wall that has a large metal gate that can be closed whenever the need arises, and several tire spikes.
Early in the morning of August 20th, they resumed their journey, reaching Jerusalem before noon, visiting the temple, and going on to their destination, arriving at Bethlehem in mid-afternoon. The inn was overcrowded, and Joseph accordingly sought lodgings with distant relatives. But every room in Bethlehem was filled to overflowing. On returning to the courtyard of the inn, Joseph was informed that the caravan stables, hewn out of the side of the rock and situated just below the inn, had been cleared of animals and cleaned up for the reception of lodgers. Joseph shouldered their bags of clothing and provisions, and with Mary descended the stone steps to their lodgings below. Tent curtains had been hung, and they counted themselves fortunate to have such comfortable quarters. Joseph had thought to go out at once and enroll, but Mary was weary. She was considerably distressed, and besought him to remain by her side, which he did. All that night, Mary was restless, so that neither of them slept much. By the break of day, the pangs of childbirth were well in evidence, and at noon, August 21st, 7 B.C., with the help and kind ministrations of women fellow travelers, Mary was delivered of a male child. Jesus of Nazareth was born into the world, was wrapped in the clothes which Mary had brought along for such a possible contingency, and laid in a nearby manger. Joseph adhered to the concept that Jesus would be a spiritual teacher, while Mary held to the idea of a Jewish Messiah, a deliverer of the Hebrew nation. Since both Zacharias and Elizabeth had the sincere conviction that Jesus was to become the Messiah, and that their son John was to be his chief of aides, it was not difficult to persuade Joseph to remain in Bethlehem. They stayed over a year, Joseph working some at his carpenter's trade.
This here, my brother, you see this kind of beautiful nativity set here. Music, Joseph, Mary, the baby Jesus, the three wise men, the shepherd, everything beautiful, Mark Bethlehem on it. It's all made by my family, by myself here in Bethlehem. After 2002, start the wall. So we have the wall here, and you see how everything is closed. The three wise men, they come late, they couldn't enter inside. They need a permission to get visa to go inside.
After more than a year of searching, Herod's spies had not located Jesus. He ordered a search of every house in Bethlehem, and thus perished in one day 16 boy babies in Bethlehem. But there were believers in the coming Messiah even among Herod's court attachés, and one of these communicated with Zacharias, who in turn dispatched a messenger to Joseph. And the night before the massacre, Joseph and Mary departed from Bethlehem with the babe for Alexandria in Egypt. They sojourned there 2 full years, returning to Nazareth after the death of Herod.
Outside my hotel window, I hear something like gunshots or firecrackers, then sirens. What's going on?
Someone's been stabbed.
Jeez.
And quite viciously. We watched the 2 girls who witnessed it. We're just watching their body language and.
A woman who came by, she said she witnessed it. The man just pulled out a knife, lifted it real high. He was about 50 years old, wearing a grey jacket, and he stabbed him several times. The shopkeepers just continued with their business. Nobody intervened.
תעיף אותם מפה. אתה מפריע לנו לעבוד. למה מצלם? מה קרה לכם?
סלק את הסלם האידיוט הזה.
אל תיגע בו, אל תיגע בו, אל תיגע בו. אל תיגע בו.
ראית הוא תקף אותי, תעצור אותו בבקשה. תעצור אותו בבקשה, הוא תקף אותי.
עזוב, יטשטשו. יטשטשו, עזוב. די.
אתה מטומטם?
There were 2 victims, both British Orthodox Jewish students in their mid-20s. One of them died an hour later on the operating table. He was planning to be married in 2 months. Driving east out of Jerusalem, one suddenly comes upon barren hills here on the freeway to Jericho. The elevation slowly drops 2,500 feet. Just before coming to Jericho, one passes the sea level mark and continues the descent. At the Dead Sea, the elevation has dropped to 1,385 feet below sea level, the lowest dry point on Earth. The sea contains 8.5 times more salt than ocean water. The density of the water makes it impossible to sink. These bathers are bobbling up and down at a depth of about 15 feet. With the exception of tiny amounts of certain bacteria and microbial fungi, no life can be sustained in its water. This point on the Dead Sea is the oasis town of En-Gedi. According to the Urantia Book, this is where John the Baptist holed up with the Nazarite Brotherhood, awaiting his time to be Jesus' herald.
After the death of his parents, John spent 2.5 years at En-Gedi, persuading most of the Brotherhood that the end of the age was at hand, that the kingdom of heaven was about to appear. At last he thought out the method of proclaiming the new age, the kingdom of God. He settled that he was to become the herald of the Messiah. He swept aside all doubts and departed from En-Gedi one day in March of AD 25 to begin his short but brilliant career as a public preacher. After the arrest of John, Jesus and Abner visited the Nazarite colony at En-Gedi. Many of the Nazarite Brotherhood became believers in Jesus, but the majority of these ascetic and eccentric men refused to accept Jesus as a teacher sent from heaven, because he did not teach fasting and other forms of self-denial. John the Baptist was executed by order of Herod Antipas on the evening of January 10th, AD 28. Jesus called the 24 together and said, "John is dead. Herod has beheaded him. The hour has come to proclaim the kingdom openly and with power."
I'm right on the opposite side of the barrier wall from Bethany, where I was a couple of days ago. In both the Urantia Book and the Bible, this is probably where the final week of Jesus' earth life began.
It was 1:30 that Sunday afternoon when Jesus made ready to start for Jerusalem from Bethany, about 2 miles from the temple. The Alphaeus twins put their cloaks on the donkey and held it while the master got on. The festive crowd threw their garments on the ground and brought branches from the nearby trees to make a carpet of honor for the donkey bearing the royal son, the promised Messiah. As they neared Jerusalem, the crowd became more demonstrative. Some of the Pharisees came up alongside Jesus and said, "Teacher, you should rebuke your disciples and exhort them to behave more seemly." Jesus answered, "It is only fitting that these children should welcome the Son of Peace, whom the chief priests have rejected. It would be useless to stop them, lest in their stead these stones by the roadside cry out." Jesus was light-hearted and cheerful as they moved along until he came to the brow of Olivet. Looking down upon the vast multitude coming forth from the city to greet him, the master was overcome with emotion. "O Jerusalem, if you had only known the things which you could so freely have, you are about to reject the gift of God, and all men will reject you."
Several of the key sites from Jerusalem from the time of Jesus are pretty well identified. The Mount of Olives, the palace of the chief priest Caiaphas, the Antonia fortress where Pilate hung out when he was in Jerusalem, and the palace of Herod Antipas. The site of the Last Supper is strictly guesswork, just somewhere in the city.
None of the apostles, save 3, knew where they were going as they made their way along the narrow streets in the approaching darkness. The crowds jostled them, but no one recognized them, nor knew that the Son of God was passing by on his way to the Last Supper with his chosen ambassadors of the kingdom. And neither did the apostles know that one of their own number had already entered into a conspiracy to betray the Master into the hands of his enemies. Jesus looked them all over and with a smile said, "I have greatly desired to eat this Passover with you. I wanted to eat with you once more before I suffered, and realizing that my hour has come, I arranged to have this supper with you tonight. For, as concerns the morrow, we are all in the hands of the Father. I have repeatedly told you that I must return to the Father. Now my hour has come, but it was not required that one of you should betray me into the hands of my enemies." Leaning over toward Judas, Jesus said, "What you have decided to do, do quickly." Jesus now knew that nothing could be done to keep Judas from turning traitor. The Master had accepted him, and up to this very hour, done everything possible to sanctify and save him. As soon as Peter, James, and John, along with some 30 other campers, saw the armed band with torches swing around the brow of the hill, they knew these soldiers were coming to arrest Jesus. Jesus made one last effort to save Judas from actually betraying him. Before the traitor could reach him, he addressed the captain of the Romans. "Whom do you seek?" The captain answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Then Jesus said, "I am he." But the traitor stepped up to Jesus and, placing a kiss on his brow, said, "Hail, Master and Teacher." Jesus said, "Friend, is it not enough to do this? Would you even betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Five of the apostles, Nathanael, Matthew, Philip, and the twins, went into hiding at Bethphage and Bethany. Thomas, Andrew, James, and Simon Zelotes were hiding in the city. Simon Peter and John Zebedee followed along to the home of Annas on Mount Olivet. Until the very end of the crucifixion, John Zebedee remained, as Jesus had directed him, always near at hand. Peter and the other apostles had been specifically warned not to endanger their lives. Peter once more denied all connection with Jesus. The cock crowed, and he remembered the words of warning. The palace doors opened. The guards led Jesus past on the way to Caiaphas' palace. As the master passed Peter, he turned and looked upon him, a glance of commingled pity and love. Peter followed them, but only for a short distance. He could not go farther. He sat down by the side of the road and wept bitterly. It was about 3:30 this Friday morning when the chief priest Caiaphas called the Sanhedrin court of inquiry to order. Caiaphas, shaking his accusing finger in the master's face, said, "I adjure you, in the name of the living God, that you tell us whether you are the deliverer, the Son of God." Jesus answered him, "I am. Soon I go to the Father, and once more reign over the hosts of heaven." Caiaphas stepped forward and smote him in the face with his hand. The other members of the court, passing out of the room, spit in Jesus' face and mockingly slapped him with the palms of their hands. And thus, in disorder and confusion, this first session of the Sanhedrin trial of Jesus ended. At 6:00 that morning, Jesus was led forth from the home of Caiaphas to appear before Pilate, to confirm the sentence of death which this Sanhedrin court had decreed. Pilate was not able to fathom Jesus' words, nor was he able to understand the nature of his spiritual kingdom. But one look at Jesus face to face was enough to convince Pilate that this gentle and weary, but majestic and upright man was no wild and dangerous revolutionary. Pilate, calling the guards, said, "This man is a Galilean. Take him to Herod." As far as he knew, Herod had never seen Jesus, although he had heard much about the miracles wrought by Jesus, and he really hoped to see him do some wonder. For some 15 minutes, Herod asked Jesus questions, but the master would not answer. Herod was finally convinced that Jesus would neither talk nor perform a miracle for him. He made fun of Jesus for a time, then arrayed him in an old purple royal robe and sent him back to Pilate, thankful it was Pilate who had the responsibility of putting him to death. Presenting this bleeding and lacerated prisoner before the mixed multitude, Pilate said, "Behold the man. Again I declare that I find no crime in him, and having scourged him, I would release him." This sight sent a shudder through a vast universe, but the mob only shouted the louder and the longer, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!"
The site of the crucifixion is a matter of speculation. The Bible itself does not indicate where the hill Golgotha was. Queen Helena identified a towering rock in the west part of the old city as Golgotha, and for that reason numberless pilgrims follow the Via Dolorosa to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Urantia Book, on the other hand, specifies that Jesus was led out from the Antonius Palace through Damascus Gate to a hill just north of the city. The only hill at this location is these days the site of a large Muslim cemetery. At the foot of this hill is a bus depot.
بديهم حطوا بديهم
It was just before 9 o'clock this morning when the soldiers led Jesus from the praetorium on the way to Golgotha. They were followed by many who secretly sympathized with Jesus, but most of this group of 200 or more were either his enemies or curious idlers who merely desired to enjoy the shock of witnessing the crucifixions. As the death procession passed along the narrow streets of Jerusalem, many of the tender-hearted Jewish women who had heard Jesus' words of good cheer and compassion and who knew of his life of loving ministry could not refrain from weeping when they saw him being led forth to such an ignoble death. As he passed by, many of these women bewailed and lamented, and when some of them even dared to follow along by his side, the Master turned his head toward them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but rather weep for yourselves and your children. Behold, the days are coming in which you will say, 'Blessed are the barren and those whose breasts have never suckled their young.' In those days you will pray the rocks of the hills to fall on you in order that you may be delivered from the terrors of your troubles." These women of Jerusalem were indeed courageous to manifest sympathy for Jesus, for it was strictly against the law to show friendly feelings for one who was being led forth to crucifixion. As the Master trudged along, he was very weary. He was nearly exhausted. There had been one hearing right after another, up to the hour of his condemnation, not to mention the abusive scourgings, with their accompanying physical suffering and loss of blood. Superimposed upon all this was his extreme mental anguish, his acute spiritual tension, and a terrible feeling of human loneliness. Shortly after passing through Damascus Gate on the way out of the city, his physical strength momentarily gave way, and he fell beneath the weight of his heavy burden. The soldiers shouted at him and kicked him, but he could not arise. When the captain saw this, knowing what Jesus had already endured, he commanded the soldiers to desist. Then he ordered a passerby, one Simon from Cyrene, to take the crossbeam from Jesus' shoulders and compelled him to carry it the rest of the way to Golgotha.
I'm purposely making this walk on a Friday morning just before 9 o'clock. Coincidentally, Friday is the day of rest and prayer for Muslims, and thousands of the devoted are headed toward Temple Mount, as I head in the opposite direction out of Damascus Gate. At Nablus Road and Solomon Street, Israeli police have set up a makeshift checkpoint. By noon, some 50,000 worshippers will have gathered at Temple Mount.
The captain led the procession, carrying small white boards on which had been written the names of the criminals and the nature of their crimes. The legend put on the cross of Jesus had been written by Pilate himself, and it read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." The Jews were infuriated by this believed insult. But Pilate was chafed by their disrespectful manner, and he took this method of obtaining petty revenge. He only replied, "What I have written, I have written." Ordinarily, it was the custom to journey to Golgotha by the longest road in order that a large number of persons might view the condemned criminal. But on this day they went by the most direct route to the Damascus Gate, which led out of the city to the north, and following this road, they soon arrived at Golgotha, the official crucifixion site of Jerusalem.
This is the only hill north of Damascus Gate, and my best speculation is this is the site of Golgotha, as described in the Urantia Book. At the top of the hill is a Muslim cemetery. The bus depot at the base of the hill serves Palestinian areas. Customers are predominantly Arab.
The Roman soldiers set themselves about the task of nailing the two brigands and the Son of Man to their respective crosses. Before Jesus was put on his cross, the two brigands had already been placed on their crosses, all the while cursing and spitting upon their executioners. Jesus' only words, as they nailed him to the crossbeam, were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Before 11 o'clock, upward of 1,000 persons had assembled to witness this spectacle of the crucifixion of the Son of Man. The unseen hosts of a universe stood in silence, while they gazed upon the Creator dying the death of the creature, even the most ignoble death of a condemned criminal. By 11:30 o'clock, most of the jesting and jeering crowd had gone its way. Less than 50 persons remained on the scene. Shortly after 1 o'clock, Jesus began to fail in human consciousness. His last words of mercy, forgiveness, and admonition had been spoken. The sandstorm grew in intensity, and the heavens increasingly darkened. It was just before 3 o'clock when Jesus, with a loud voice, cried out, "It is finished. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And when he had thus spoken, he bowed his head and gave up the life struggle.
Coincidentally, over 100 years ago, General Charles Gordon of the British Army conjectured that this unusual rock formation was Golgotha, the place of the skull. On further inspection, he found this nearby tomb, which is these days called the Garden Tomb, and is a place of pilgrimage for mostly Protestant Christians. While it's only speculative that this could be the tomb, the Urantia Book does say that the burial place of Jesus is located a short distance north of Golgotha and across the road leading to Samaria, somewhere here, the same vicinity as the Garden Tomb.
The women were greatly surprised to see the stone rolled away from the entrance to the tomb. When Mary Magdalene saw that Jesus' body was gone, and in its place only these grave cloths, she uttered a cry of alarm and anguish. The other women fled all the way to Damascus Gate before realizing they had left Mary behind. They returned to the tomb. As these women talked over the situation, they looked to one side and observed a silent and motionless stranger. "Where have you taken the Master? Where have they laid him?" When the stranger did not answer Mary, she began to weep. Then Jesus spoke to them. "Whom do you seek?"
This is my last day in Israel. A little after 7 a.m., I get in my rental car and head over to the Mount of Olives, about a 5-minute drive from my hotel, and go about 2/3 the way up this hill, where the Urantia Book states Jesus was last seen.
It was almost 7:30 this Thursday morning, May 18th, when Jesus arrived on Mount Olivet with his 11 silent and somewhat bewildered apostles. Without being directed, they knelt about him in a circle. The Master said, "Love each person with the love wherewith I have loved you, and serve your fellow mortals even as I have served you. Impel souls to believe the truth that each human is a child of God, and that all are brothers and sisters. Remember all I have taught you, and the life I have lived among you. My love overshadows you. My spirit will dwell with you, and my peace shall abide upon you. Farewell." About 1 o'clock, as the 120 believers were engaged in prayer, they all became aware of a strange presence in the room. At the same time, these disciples all became conscious of a new and profound sense of spiritual joy, security, and confidence. Peter stood up and declared that this must be the coming of the Spirit of truth, and proposed that they go to the temple and begin the proclamation of the good news. And they did just what Peter suggested.
I'm at Ben Gurion Airport. My flight leaves at 5:30 a.m. Situated in the center of the airport terminal is this circular water sculpture, which releases a cascade of rain every few minutes. This primal symbol greets travelers coming and going to Israel. The Urantia Book talks about the journey that awaits us beyond this short life in the flesh, and those who have gone before us. Long since, these ascendant children of time have learned to feast upon uncertainty, to fatten upon disappointment, to enthuse over apparent defeat, and to exercise unconquerable faith when confronted with the challenge of the inexplicable. In liaison with God, nothing, absolutely nothing, is impossible.
Jesus did not live his life on earth in order to set a perfect and detailed example for all other humans to copy. He lived this life by the same mercy ministry that you all may live your lives. He lived his mortal life in his day and as he was, and set the example for all of us to live our lives in our day and as we are. Jesus is the new and living way from man to God, from the partial to the perfect, from the earthly to the heavenly, from time to eternity.